between sessions. We do that for a number of reasons, including security and including measuring ads to make sure that the ad experiences are the most effective, which, of course, people can opt out of. But I want to make sure that I'm precise in my answer. So
when you get back to me,
after.
sir, would you also let us know how Facebook discloses to its users that engaging in this type of tracking gives us that result?
Yes.
And thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. Senator Leahy's up next.
Thank you. Mr. Zuckerberg, I assume Facebook's been served with subpoenas from the special counsel Mueller's office. Is that correct?
Yes.
Have you or anyone at Facebook been interviewed by the special counsel's office?
Yes.
Have you been interviewed?
I have not. I have not.
Others have.
I believe so, and I want to be careful here because that our work with the special counsel is confidential, and I want to make sure that in an open session I'm not revealing something that's confidential.
I understand. I just want to make clear that you have been contacted, you have had subpoenas.
Actually, let me clarify that. I actually am not aware of a subpoena. I believe that there may be, but I know we're working with them.
Thank you. 6 months ago, your general counsel promised us that you were taking steps to prevent Facebook from serving what I would call an unwitting co-conspirator in Russian interference. But these unverified divisive pages are on Facebook today. They look a lot like the anonymous groups of Russian agents used to spread propaganda during the 2016 election. Are you able to confirm whether they're Russian-created groups? Yes or no?
Senator, are you asking about those specifically?
Yes.
Senator, last week we actually announced a major change to our ads and pages policies that we will be verifying the identity of every single advertiser.
Specific ones. Do you know whether they are?
I am not familiar with those pieces of content specifically.
But if you decided this policy of a week ago, you'd be able to verify them?
We are working on that now. What we're doing is we're going to verify the identity of any advertiser who's running a political or issue-related ad. This is basically what the Honest Ads Act is proposing, and we're following that. And we're also going to do that for pages.
But you can't answer on these.
I'm not familiar with those specific cases.
Will you find out the answer and get back to me?
I'll have my team get back to you. I do think it's worth adding, though, that we're going to do the same verification of the identity and location of admins who are running large pages. So that way, even if they aren't going to be buying ads in our system, that will make it significantly harder for Russian interference efforts or other inauthentic efforts to try to spread misinformation through the network.
Insofar as it's been going on for some time, some might say that's about time. 6 months ago, I asked your general counsel about Facebook's role as a breeding ground for hate speech against Rohingya refugees. Recently, UN investigators blamed Facebook for playing a role in inciting possible genocide in Myanmar, and there has been genocide there. Now, you say you use AI to find this. This is the type of content I'm referring to. It calls for the death of a Muslim journalist. Now, that threat went straight through your detection systems. It spread very quickly. And then it took attempt after attempt after attempt and the involvement of civil society groups to get you to remove it. Why couldn't it be removed within 24 hours?
Senator, what's happening in Myanmar is a terrible tragedy, and we need to do more.
We all agree with that.
Okay.
But UN investigators have blamed, you blame Facebook for playing a role in their genocide. We all agree it's terrible. How can you dedicate, and will you dedicate, the resources to make sure such hate speech is taken down within 24 hours?
Yes, we're working on this. And there are three specific things that we're doing. One is we're hiring dozens of more Burmese language content reviewers because hate speech is very language specific. It's hard to do it without people who speak the local language, and we need to ramp up our effort there dramatically. Second is we're working with civil society in Myanmar to identify specific hate figures so we can take down their accounts rather than specific pieces of content. And third is we're standing up a product team to do specific product changes in Myanmar and other countries that may have similar issues in the future to prevent this from happening.
Senator Cruz and I sent a letter to Apple asking what they're going to do about Chinese censorship. My question, I'll place it
That'd be great. Thank you, Senator Leahy.
for the record. I want to know what you will do about Chinese censorship when they come to you.
Senator Graham's up next.
Thank you. Are you familiar with Andrew Bosworth?
Yes, Senator, I am.
He said, so we connect more people, maybe someone dies in a terrorist attack, coordinated on our tools. The ugly truth is that we believe in connecting people so deeply that anything that allows us to connect more people more often is de facto good. Do you agree with that?
No, Senator, I do not. And as context, Boz wrote that. Boz is what we call him internally. He wrote that as an internal note. We have a lot of discussion internally. I disagreed with it at the time that he wrote it. If you looked at the comments on the internal discussion, the vast majority of people internally did too.
That you did a poor job as a CEO communicating your displeasure with such thoughts? Because if he had understood where you were at, he would never said it to begin with.
Well, Senator, we try to run our company in a way where people can express different opinions internally.
Well, this is an opinion that really disturbs me. And if somebody worked for me that said this, I'd fire him. Who's your biggest competitor?
Senator, we have a lot of competitors.
Who's your biggest?
I think the categories of, do you want just one? I'm not sure I can give one, but can I give a bunch?
Mm-hmm.
So there are three categories that I would focus on. One are the other tech platforms, so Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft. We overlap with them in different ways.
Do they provide the same service you provide?
In different ways, different parts of it,
Let me put it
yes.
this way. If I buy a Ford and it doesn't work well and I don't like it, I can buy a Chevy. If I'm upset with Facebook, what's the equivalent product that I can go sign up for?
Well, there's the second category that I was going to talk about.
I'm not talking about categories. I'm talking about, is there real competition you face? Because car companies face a lot of competition. If they make a defective car, it gets out in the world, people stop buying that car, they buy another one. Is it an alternative to Facebook in the private sector?
Yes, Senator. The average American uses 8 different apps to communicate with their friends and stay in touch with people, ranging from texting apps to email.
It's the same service you provide.
Well, we provide a number of different services.
Is Twitter the same as what you do?
It overlaps with a portion of what we do.
You don't think you have a monopoly?
It certainly doesn't feel like that to me.
Okay. So it doesn't. So Instagram, you bought Instagram. Why did you buy Instagram?
Because they were very talented app developers who were making good use of our platform and understood our values.
It was a good business decision. My point is that one way to regulate a company is through competition, through government regulation. Here's the question that all of us got to answer. What do we tell our constituents, given what's happened here, why we should let you self-regulate? What would you tell people in South Carolina that, given all the things we've just discovered here, it's a good idea for us to rely upon you to regulate your own business practices?
Well, Senator, my position is not that there should be no regulation.
Okay.
I think the internet is
Do
increasingly
you embrace
important.
regulation?
I think the real question, as the internet becomes more important in people's lives, is what is the right regulation, not whether there should be or
But you
not.
as a company welcome regulation?
I think if it's the right regulation, then
Do you
yes.
think the Europeans have it right?
I think that they get things right.
Have you ever submitted? That's true. So would you work with us in terms of what regulations you think are necessary in your industry?
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you submit to us some proposed regulations?
Yes, and I'll have my team follow up with you so that way we can have this discussion across the different categories where I think that this discussion needs to happen.
Look forward to it. When you sign up for Facebook, you sign up for terms of service. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. It says, the terms govern your use of Facebook and the products, features, apps, services, technologies, software we offer, Facebook's products or products, except where we expressly state that separate terms and not these apply. I'm a lawyer, I have no idea what that means. But when you look at terms of service, this is what you get. Do you think the average consumer understands what they're signing up for?
I don't think that the average person likely reads that whole document.
Yeah.
But I think that there are different ways that we can communicate that and have a responsibility to do so.
Do you agree with me that you better come up with different ways because this ain't working?
Well, Senator, I think in certain areas that is true. And I think in other areas, like the core part of what we do, right? If you think about just at the most basic level, people come to Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger about 100 billion times a day to share a piece of content or a message with a specific set of people. And I think that that basic functionality, people understand because we have the controls in line every time. And given the volume of the activity and the value that people tell us that they're getting from that, I think that that control in line does seem to be working fairly well. Now, we can always do better. And there are the services are complex and there is more to it than just, you go and you post a photo. So I agree that in many places we could do better. But I think for the core of the service, it actually is quite clear.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, I think we all agree that what happened here was bad. You acknowledged it was a breach of trust. And the way I explain it to my constituents is that if someone breaks into my apartment with a crowbar and they take my stuff, it is just like if the manager gave them the keys or if they didn't have any locks on the doors. It's still a breach. It's still a break-in. And I believe we need to have laws and rules that are sophisticated as the brilliant products that you've developed here. And we just haven't done that yet. And one of the areas that I've focused on is the election. And I appreciate the support that you and Facebook and now Twitter actually have given to the Honest Ads Act, a bill that you mentioned that I'm leading with Senator McCain and Senator Warner. And I just want to be clear as we work to pass this law so that we have the same rules in place to disclose political ads and issue ads as we do for TV and radio, as well as disclaimers, that you're going to take early action as soon as June, I heard, before this election, so that people can view these ads, including issue ads. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator. And I just want to take a moment before I go into this in more detail to thank you for your leadership on this. This, I think, is an important area for the whole industry to move on. The two specific things that we're doing are, one is around transparency. So now you're going to be able to go and click on any advertiser or any page on Facebook and see all of the ads that they're running. So that actually brings advertising online on Facebook to an even higher standard than what you would have on TV or print media, because there's nowhere where you can see all of the TV ads that someone is running, for example, whereas you will be able to see now on Facebook whether this campaign or third party is saying different messages to different types of people. I think that that's a really important element of transparency. Mm-hmm. Then the other really important piece is around verifying every single advertiser who's going to be running political or issue ads.
I appreciate that. And Senator Warner and I have also called on Google and the other platforms to do the same. So memo to the rest of you. We have to get this done or we're going to have a patchwork of ads. And I hope that you'll be working with us to pass this bill. Is that right?
We will.
Okay, thank you. Now on the subject of Cambridge Analytica, were these people, the 87 million people, users, concentrated in certain states? Are you able to figure out where they're from?
I do not have that information with me,
but
we can follow up with your office.
Okay, because as we know, that election was close and it was only thousands of votes in certain states. You've also estimated that roughly 126 million people may have been shown content from a Facebook page associated with the Internet Research Agency. Have you determined whether any of those people were the same Facebook users whose data was shared with Cambridge Analytica? Are you able to make that determination?
Senator, we're investigating that now. we believe that it is entirely possible that there will be a connection there.
Okay, that seems like a big deal as we look back at that last election. Former Cambridge Analytica employee Christopher Wiley has said that the data that it improperly obtained, that Cambridge Analytica improperly obtained from Facebook users, could be stored in Russia. Do you agree that that's a possibility?
Sorry, are you asking if Cambridge Analytica's data could be stored in Russia?
That's what he said this weekend on a Sunday show.
Senator, I don't have any specific knowledge that would suggest that, but one of the steps that we need to take now is go do a full audit of all of Cambridge Analytica's systems to understand what they're doing, whether they still have any data, to make sure that they remove all the data. If they don't, we're going to take legal action against them to do so. That audit, we have temporarily seeded that in order to let the UK government complete their government investigation first, because of course a government investigation takes precedence over a company doing that. But we are committed to completing this full audit and getting to the bottom of what's going on here, so that way we can have more answers to this.
Okay, you earlier stated publicly and here that you would support some privacy rules so that everyone's playing by the same rules here. And you also said here that you should have notified customers earlier. Would you support a rule that would require you to notify your users of a breach within 72 hours?
Senator, that makes sense to me, and I think we should have our team follow up with yours to discuss the details around that more.
Thank you. I just think part of this was when people don't even know that their data's been breached, that's a huge problem, and I also think we get to solutions faster when we get that information out there. Thank you, and we look forward to passing this bill. We'd love to pass it before the election on the honest ads, and looking forward to better disclosure this election. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Blunt's up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, nice to see you. When I saw you not too long after I entered the Senate in 2011, I told you when I sent my business cards down to be printed, they came back from the Senate print shop with the message that was the first business card they'd ever printed a Facebook address on. There are days when I've regretted that, but more days when we get lots of information that we need to get. There are days when I wonder if the Facebook friends is a little misstated. It doesn't seem like I have those every single day. But, you know, the platform you've created is really important. Now, my son, Charlie, who's 13, is dedicated to Instagram, so he'd want to be sure I mentioned him while I was here with you. I haven't printed that on my card yet. I will say that, but I think we have that account as well. Lots of ways to connect people. And the information, obviously, is an important commodity, and it's what makes your business work. I get that. However, I wonder about some of the collection efforts, and maybe we can go through largely just even yes and no, and then we'll get back to more expansive discussion of this. But do you collect user data through cross-device tracking?
Senator, I believe we do link people's accounts between devices in order to make sure that their Facebook and Instagram and their other experiences can be synced between their devices.
And that would also include offline data that's tracking that's not necessarily linked to Facebook, but linked to some device they went through Facebook on. Is that right?
Senator, I want to make sure we get this right, so I want to have my team follow up with you on that afterwards.
That doesn't seem that complicated to me. Now, you understand this better than I do, but maybe you can explain to me why that's complicated. Do you track devices that an individual who uses Facebook has that is connected to the device that they use for their Facebook connection, but not necessarily connected to Facebook?
I'm not sure the answer to that question.
Really?
Yes. There may be some data that is necessary to provide the service that we do, but I don't have that on sitting here today, so that's something that I would want to follow up.
Now, the FTC last year flagged cross-device tracking as one of their concerns, generally that people are tracking devices that the users of something like Facebook don't know that are being tracked. How do you disclose your collection methods. Is that all in this document that I would see and agree to before I entered into a Facebook?
Yes, Senator. So there are two ways that we do this. One is we try to be exhaustive in the legal documents around the terms of service and privacy policies. But more importantly, we try to provide inline controls so that people that are in plain English that people can understand. They can either go to settings or we can show them at the top of the app periodically so that people understand all the controls and settings they have and can configure their experience the way that they want.
So do people now give you permission to track specific devices in their contract? And if they do, is that a relatively new addition to what you do?
Senator, I'm sorry, I don't have that.
Am I able to opt out? Am I able to say it's okay for you to track what I'm saying on Facebook, but I don't want you to track what I'm texting to somebody else off Facebook on an Android phone?
Oh, okay. Yes, Senator. In general, Facebook is not collecting data from other apps that you use. There may be some specific things about the device that you're using that Facebook needs to understand in order to offer the service. But if you're using Google or you're using some texting app, unless you specifically opt in that you want to share the texting app information, Facebook wouldn't see that.
Has it always been that way? Or is that a recent addition to how you deal with those other ways that I might communicate?
Senator, my understanding is that that is how the mobile operating systems are architected.
So do you don't have bundled permissions for how I can agree to what devices I may use that you may have contact with? Do you bundle that permission, or am I able to one it individually say what I'm willing for you to watch and what I don't want you to watch? And I think we may have to take that for the record based on everybody else's time.
Thank you, Senator Blunt. Next up, Senator Durbin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
If you've messaged anybody this week, would you share with us the names of the people you've messaged?
Senator, no, I would probably not choose to do that publicly here.
I think that may be what this is all about. Your right to privacy, the limits of your right to privacy, and how much you give away in modern America in the name of, quote, connecting people around the world. The question basically of what information Facebook's collecting, who they're sending it to, and whether they ever asked me in advance my permission to do that. Is that a fair thing for a user of Facebook to expect?
Yes, Senator. I think everyone should have control over how their information is used. And as we've talked about in some of the other questions, I think that is laid out in some of the documents. But more importantly, you want to give people control in the product itself. So the most important way that this happens across our services is that every day people come to our services to choose to share photos or send messages. And every single time they choose to share something, they have a control right there about who they want to share it with. But that level of control is extremely important.
They certainly know within the Facebook pages who their friends are, but they may not know, as has happened, and you've conceded this point in the past, that sometimes that information is going way beyond their friends, and sometimes people have made money off of sharing that information. Correct?
Senator, you're referring, I think, to our developer platform, and it may be useful for me to give some background on how we set that up, if that's useful.
I have 3 minutes left, so maybe you can do that for the record, because I have a couple of the questions I'd like to ask. You have recently announced something that is called Messenger Kids. Facebook created an app allowing kids between the ages of 6 and 12 to send video and text messages through Facebook as an extension of their parents' account. You have cartoon-like stickers and other features designed to appeal to little kids, first graders, kindergartners. On January 30th, the Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood and lots of other child development organizations warned Facebook. They pointed to a wealth of research demonstrating that excessive use of digital devices and social media is harmful to kids, and argued that young children simply are not ready to handle social media accounts at age 6. In addition, there are concerns about data that's being gathered about these kids. Now, there are certain limits in the law, we know. There's a Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. What guarantees can you give us that no data from messenger kids is or will be collected or shared with those that might violate that law?
All right, Senator, so a number of things I think are important here. The background on messenger kids is we heard feedback from thousands of parents that they want to be able to stay in touch with their kids and call them, use apps like FaceTime when they're working late or not around and want to communicate with their kids, but they want to have complete control over that. So I think we can all agree that when your kid is 6 or 7, even if they have access to a phone, you want to be able to control everyone who they can contact. And there wasn't an app out there that did that. So we built this service to do that. The app collects a minimum amount of information that is necessary to operate the service. So for example, the messages that people send is something that we collect in order to operate the service. But in general, that data is not going to be shared with third parties. It is not connected to the broader Facebook experience.
Excuse me, as a lawyer, I picked up on that word in general, that phrase in general. It seems to suggest that in some circumstances it will be shared with third parties.
No, it will not.
All right. Would you be open to the idea that someone having reached adult age, having grown up with messenger kids, should be allowed to delete the data that you've collected?
Senator, yes. As a matter of fact, when you become 13, which is our legal limit or limiter, we don't allow people under the age of 13 to use Facebook, you don't automatically go from having a Messenger Kids account to a Facebook account. You have to start over and get a Facebook account. So I think it's a good idea to consider making sure that all that information is deleted, and in general, people are going to be starting over when they get their Facebook or other accounts.
I'll close because I just have a few seconds. Illinois has a Biometric Information Privacy Act, our state does, which is to regulate the commercial use of facial, voice, finger, and iris scans and the like. We're now in a fulsome debate on that, and I'm afraid Facebook has come down to the position trying to carve out exceptions to that. I hope you'll fill me in on how that is consistent with protecting privacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here. I know up until 2014, the mantra or motto of Facebook was move fast and break things. Is that correct?
I don't know when we changed it, but the mantra is currently move fast with stable infrastructure, which is a much less sexy mantra.
Sounds much more boring, but my question is, during the time that it was Facebook's mantra or motto to move fast and break things, do you think some of the misjudgments, perhaps mistakes that you've admitted to here were as a result of that culture or that attitude, particularly as regards to personal privacy of the information of your subscribers?
Senator, I do think that we made mistakes because of that, but the broadest mistakes that we made here are not taking a broad enough view of our responsibility. And that wasn't a matter. The move fast cultural value is more tactical around whether engineers can ship things and different ways that we operate. But I think the big mistake that we've made looking back on this is viewing our responsibility as just building tools rather than viewing our whole responsibility as making sure that those tools are used for good.
Well, I appreciate that, because previously or early in the past, we've been told that platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the like are neutral platforms, and the people who own and run those for profit, and I'm not criticizing doing something for profit in this country, but they bore no responsibility for the content. You agree now that Facebook and other social media platforms are not neutral platforms, but bear some responsibility for the content.
I agree that we're responsible for the content. And I think that there's one of the big societal questions that I think we're going to need to answer is the current framework that we have is based on this reactive model that assumed that there weren't AI tools that could proactively tell whether something was terrorist content or something bad. So it naturally relied on requiring people to flag for a company and then the company needing to take reasonable action. In the future, we're going to have tools that are going to be able to identify more types of bad content. And I think that there are moral and legal obligation questions that I think we'll have to wrestle with as a society about when we want to require companies to take action proactively on certain of those things and when that gets in the way of...
I appreciate that. I have 2 minutes left
All right.
to ask you questions. So you interestingly, the terms of what do you call it? The terms of service is a legal document which discloses to your subscribers how their information is going to be used, how Facebook is going to operate. And but you concede that you doubt everybody reads or understands that legalese, those terms of service. So is that to suggest that the consent that people give subject to that terms of service is not informed consent? In other words, they may not read it, and even if they read it, they may not understand it?
I just think we have a broader responsibility than what the law requires. So I appreciate that. What I'm asking about in terms of what your subscribers understand in terms of how their data is going to be used. But let me go to the terms of service. Under paragraph number 2, you say you own all of the content and information you post on Facebook. That's what you've told us here today a number of times. So if I choose to terminate my Facebook account, can I bar Facebook or any third parties from using the data that I had previously supplied for any purpose whatsoever? Yes, Senator. If you delete your account, we should get rid of all of your information.
You should, or
we do.
Do you?
We do.
How about third parties that you have contracted with to use some of that underlying information, perhaps to target advertising for themselves? You can't. Do you claw back that information as well, or does that remain in their custody?
Well, Senator, this is actually a very important question, and I'm glad you brought this up because there's a very common misperception about Facebook that we sell data to advertisers. And we do not sell data to advertisers.
Well,
we don't sell data
you clearly
to anyone.
rent it.
What we allow is for advertisers to tell us who they want to reach, and then we do the placement. So if an advertiser comes to us and says, all right, I'm a ski shop and I want to sell skis to women, then we might have some sense because people shared skiing-related content or said they were interested in that. They shared whether they're a woman, and then we can show the ads to the right people without that data ever changing hands and going to the advertiser. That's a very fundamental part of how our model works and something that is often misunderstood. So I appreciate that you brought that up.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. We had indicated earlier on that we would take a couple of breaks, give our witness an opportunity. And I think we've been going now for just under 2 hours. So I think what we'll do is...
You do a few more.
Zuckerberg, are you want to keep going?
I mean, maybe 15 minutes.
Okay.
Does that work?
All right, we'll keep going. Senator Blumenthal is up next, and we will commence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Zuckerberg. You have told us today, and you've told the world, that Facebook was deceived by Alexander Kogan when he sold user information to Cambridge Analytica, correct?
Yes.
I want to show you the terms of service that Alexander Kogan provided to Facebook. And note for you that, in fact, Facebook was on notice that he could sell that user information. Have you seen these terms of service before?
I have not.
Who in Facebook was responsible for seeing those terms of service that put you on notice that that information could be sold?
Senator, our app review team would be responsible for that.
Has
And-
anyone been fired on that app review team?
Senator, not because of this.
Doesn't that term of service conflict with the FTC order that Facebook was under at that very time, that this term of service was, in fact, provided to Facebook? And you'll note that the FTC order specifically requires Facebook to protect privacy. Isn't there a conflict there?
Senator, it certainly appears that we should have been aware that this app developer submitted a term that was in conflict with the rules of the platform.
Well, what happened here was, in effect, willful blindness. It was heedless and reckless, which, in fact, amounted to a violation of the FTC consent decree. Would you agree?
No, Senator. My understanding is not that this was a violation of the consent decree, but as I've said a number of times today, I think we need to take a broader view of our responsibility around privacy than just what is mandated in the current laws.
Well,
or the
here
consent
is my reservation, Mr. Zuckerberg, and I apologize for interrupting you, but my time is limited. We've seen the apology tours before. You have refused to acknowledge even an ethical obligation to have reported this violation of the FTC consent decree. And we have letters, we've had contacts with Facebook employees, and I'm going to submit a letter for the record from Sandy Parakilis, with your permission, that indicates not only a lack of resources, but lack of attention to privacy. And so my reservation about your testimony today is that I don't see how you can change your business model unless there are specific rules of the road. Your business model is to monetize user information, to maximize profit over privacy. And unless there are specific rules and requirements enforced by an outside agency, I have no assurance that these kinds of vague commitments are going to produce action. So I want to ask you a couple of very specific questions, and they are based on legislation that I've offered, the My Data Act, legislation that Senator Markey is introducing today, the Consent Act, which I'm joining. Don't you agree that companies ought to be required to provide users with clear, plain information about how their data will be used and specific ability to consent to the use of that information?
Senator, I do generally agree with what you're saying, and I laid that out earlier when I talked about what...
Would you agree to an opt-in as opposed to an opt-out?
Senator, I think that certainly makes sense to discuss, and I think the details around this matter a lot.
Would you agree that users should be able to access all of their information?
Senator, yes, of course.
All of the information that you collect as a result of purchases from data brokers, as well as tracking them?
Senator, we have already a download your information tool that allows people to see and to take out all of the information that they've put into Facebook or that Facebook knows about them. So yes, I agree with that. We already have that.
I have a number of other specific requests that you agree to support as part of legislation. I think legislation is necessary. The rules of the road have to be the result of congressional action. Facebook has participated recently in the fight against the scourge of sex trafficking, and the bill that we've just passed, it will be signed into law tomorrow. SESTA, the Stop Exploiting Sex Trafficking Act, was the result of our cooperation. I hope that we can cooperate on this kind of measure as well.
Senator, I look forward to having my team work with you on this.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, welcome. Thank you for being here. Mr. Zuckerberg, does Facebook consider itself a neutral public forum?
Senator, we consider ourselves to be a platform for all ideas.
Let me ask the question again. Does Facebook consider itself to be a neutral public forum? And representatives of your company have given conflicting answers on this. Are you a First Amendment speaker expressing your views, or are you a neutral public forum allowing everyone to speak?
Senator, here's how we think about this. I don't believe that there is certain content that clearly we do not allow, right? Hate speech, terrorist content, nudity, anything that makes people feel unsafe in the community. From that perspective, that's why we generally try to refer to what we do as a platform for all ideas.
Let me try, just because the time is constrained. It's just a simple question. The predicate for Section 230 immunity under the CDA is that you are a neutral public forum. Do you consider yourself a neutral public forum, or are you engaged in political speech, which is your right under the First Amendment?
Well, Senator, our goal is certainly not to engage in political speech. I'm not that familiar with the specific legal language of the law that you speak to, so I would need to follow up with you on that. I'm just trying to lay out how broadly I think about this.
Well, Mr. Zuckerberg, I will say there are a great many Americans who I think are deeply concerned that Facebook and other tech companies are engaged in a pervasive pattern of bias and political censorship. There have been numerous instances with Facebook. In May of 2016, Gizmodo reported that Facebook had purposely and routinely suppressed conservative stories from trending news, including stories about CPAC, including stories about Mitt Romney, including stories about the Lois Lerner IRS scandal, including stories about Glenn Beck. In addition to that, Facebook has initially shut down the Chick-fil-A Appreciation Day page, has blocked a post of a Fox News reporter, has blocked over 24 Catholic pages, and most recently blocked Trump supporters Diamond and Silk's page with 1.2 million Facebook followers after determining their content and brand were, quote, unsafe to the community. To a great many Americans, that appears to be a pervasive pattern of political bias. Do you agree with that assessment?
Senator, let me say a few things about this. First, I understand where that concern is coming from because Facebook and the tech industry are located in Silicon Valley, which is an extremely left-leaning place. And this is actually a concern that I have and that I try to root out in the company, is making sure that we don't have any bias in the work that we do. And I think it is a fair concern that that people would at least wonder about.
Let me ask this question. Are you aware of any ad or page that has been taken down from Planned Parenthood?
Senator, I'm not, but let me just...
How about MoveOn.org?
Sorry?
How about MoveOn.org?
I'm not specifically aware of those.
How about
cases.
any Democratic candidate for office?
I'm not specifically aware. I mean, I'm not sure.
In your testimony, you say that you have 15 to 20,000 people working on security and content review. Do you know the political orientation of those 15 to 20,000 people engaged in content review?
No, Senator. We do not generally ask people about their political orientation when they're joining the company.
So as CEO, have you ever made hiring or firing decisions based on political positions or what candidates they supported?
No.
Why was Palmer Luckey fired?
That is a specific personnel matter that seems like it would be inappropriate to speak to here.
You just made a specific representation that you didn't make decisions based on political views.
Well,
is that accurate?
I can commit that it was not because of a political view.
Do you know of those 15 to 20,000 people engaged in content review, how many, if any, have ever supported financially a Republican candidate for office?
Senator, I do not know that.
Your testimony says it is not enough that we just connect people. We have to make sure those connections are positive. It says we have to make sure people aren't using their voice to hurt people or spread misinformation. We have a responsibility not just to build tools, to make sure those tools are used for good. Mr. Zuckerberg, do you feel it's your responsibility to assess users whether they are good and positive connections or ones that those 15 to 20,000 people deem unacceptable or deplorable?
Senator, you're asking about me personally?
Facebook.
Senator, I think that there are a number of things that we would all agree are clearly bad. Foreign interference in our elections, terrorism, self-harm.
I'm
Those
talking
are
about
things.
censorship.
Oh, well, I think that you would probably agree that we should remove terrorist propaganda from the service. So that, I agree, I think is clearly bad activity that we want to get down, and we're generally proud of how well we do at that. Now, what I can say, and I do want to get this in before the end here, is that I'm very committed to making sure that Facebook is a platform for all ideas. That is a very important founding principle of what we do. We're proud of the discourse and the different ideas that people can share on the service. And that is something that, as long as I'm running the company, I'm going to be committed to making sure is the case.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Do you want to break now? Or you want to keep going?
Sure. I mean, that was pretty good. So, all right.
All right, we have Senator Whitehouse is up next, but if you want to take a 5-minute break right now, we have now been going a good 2 hours. So
thank you.
We'll recess for 5 minutes and reconvene.
Before I call on Senator Whitehouse, Senator Feinstein asks permission to put letters and statements in the record, and without objection, they will be put in from the ACLU, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, the Association for Computing Machinery Public Policy Council, and Public Knowledge. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I want to correct one thing that I said earlier in response to a question from Senator Leahy. He had asked if why we didn't ban Cambridge Analytica at the time when we learned about them in 2015, and I answered that what my understanding was that they were not on the platform, were not a app developer or advertiser. When I went back and met with my team afterwards, they let me know that Cambridge Analytica actually did start as an advertiser later in 2015, so we could have, in theory, banned them then. We made a mistake by not doing so, but I just wanted to make sure that I updated that, and because I misspoke or got that wrong earlier.
Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome back, Mr. Zuckerberg. On the subject of bans, I just wanted to explore a little bit what these bans mean. Obviously, Facebook has been done considerable reputational damage by its association with Alexander Kogan and with Cambridge Analytica, which is one of the reasons you're having this enjoyable afternoon with us. Your testimony says that Alexander Kogan's app has been banned. Has he also been banned?
Yes, my understanding is he has.
So if he were to open up another account under a name and you were able to find it out, that would be closed down.
Senator, I believe we are preventing him from building any more apps.
Does he have a Facebook account still?
Senator, I believe the answer to that is no, but I can follow up with you afterwards.
Okay. And with respect to Cambridge Analytica, your testimony is that first, you required them to formally certify that they had deleted all improperly acquired data. Where did that formal certification take place? That sounds kind of like a quasi-official thing to formally certify. What did that entail?
Senator, first, they sent us an email notice from their chief data officer telling us that they didn't have any of the data anymore, that they deleted it and weren't using it. And then later, we followed up with, I believe, a full legal contract where they certified that they had deleted the data.
In a legal contract?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And then you ultimately said that you have banned Cambridge Analytica. Who exactly is banned? What if they opened up Cranston, Rhode Island Analytica? Different corporate form, same enterprise. Would that enterprise also be banned?
Senator, that is certainly the intent. Cambridge Analytica actually has a parent company, and we banned the parent company. And recently, we also banned a firm called AIQ, which I think is also associated with them. And if we find other firms that are associated with them, we will block them from the platform as well.
Are individual principals, PALS, principals of the firm also banned?
Senator, my understanding is we're blocking them from doing business on the platform, but I do not believe that we're blocking people's personal accounts.
Okay. Can any customer amend your terms of service? Or is the terms of service a take it or leave it proposition for the average customer?
Senator, I think the terms of service are what they are, but the service is really defined by people because you get to choose what information you share. And the whole service is about which friends you connect to, which people you choose to connect to.
My question would relate to Senator Graham held up that big fat document. It's easy to put a lot of things buried in a document that then later turn out to be of consequence. And all I wanted to establish with you is that that document that Senator Graham held up, that is not a negotiable thing with individual customers, that is a take it or leave it proposition for your customers to sign up to or not use the service.
Senator, that's right on the terms of service, although we offer a lot of controls so people can configure the experience how they want.
So, last question on a different subject having to do with the authorization process that you are undertaking for entities that are putting up political content or so-called issue ad content. You've said that they all have to go through an authorization process before they do it. You said here, we will be verifying the identity. How do you look behind a shell corporation and find who's really behind it through your authorization process? Well, step back. Do you need to look behind shell corporations in order to find out who is really behind the content that's being posted? And if you may need to look behind a shell corporation, how will you go about doing that? How will you get back to the true, what lawyers would call beneficial owner of the site that is putting out the political material?
Senator, are you referring to the verification of political and issue ads?
Yes. And before that, political ads, yes.
Yes. So what we're going to do is require a valid government identity, and we're going to verify the location. So we're going to do that so that way someone sitting in Russia, for example, couldn't say that they're in America and therefore able to run an election ad.
But if they were running through a corporation domiciled in Delaware, you wouldn't know that they were actually a Russian owner.
Senator, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. My time has expired, and I appreciate the courtesy of the chair for the extra seconds. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, I wanted to follow up on a statement that you made shortly before the break, just a few minutes ago. You said that there are some categories of speech, some types of content that Facebook would never want to have any part of, and it takes active steps to avoid disseminating, including hate speech, nudity, racist speech. I assume you also meant terrorist acts, threats of physical violence, things like that. Beyond that, would you agree that Facebook ought not be putting its thumb on the scale with regard to the content of speech, assuming it fits out of one of those categories that's prohibited?
Senator, yes. There are generally two categories of content that we're very worried about. One are things that could cause real-world harm. So terrorism certainly fits into that. Self-harm fits into that. I would consider election interference to fit into that. And those are the types of things that I don't really consider there to be much discussion around whether those are good or bad topics.
Yeah, and I'm not disputing that. What I'm asking is, once you get beyond those categories of things that are prohibited and should be, is it Facebook's position that it should not be putting its thumb on the scale? It should not be favoring or disfavoring speech based on its content, based on the viewpoint of that speech?
Senator, in general, that's our position. One of the things that is really important, though, is that in order to create a service where everyone has a voice, we also need to make sure that people aren't bullied or basically intimidated or the environment feels unsafe for them.
Okay. So when you say in general, that's the exception that you're referring to. The exception being that if someone feels bullied, even if it's not a terrorist act, nudity, terrorist threats, racist speech, or something like that, you might step in there. Beyond that, would you step in and put your thumb on the scale as far as the viewpoint of the content being posted?
Senator, no. I mean, in general, our goal is to allow people to have as much expression as possible.
Okay, so subject to the exceptions we've discussed, you would stay out of that. Let me ask you this. Isn't there a significant free market incentive that a social media company, including yours, has in order to safeguard the data of your users? Don't you have free market incentives? And in that respect,
Senator, yes.
Don't your interests align with those of us here who want to see data safeguarded?
Absolutely.
Do you have the technological means available at your disposal to make sure that doesn't happen and to protect, say, an app developer from transferring Facebook data to a third party?
Senator, a lot of that we do, and some of that happens outside of our systems and will require new measures. So, for example, what we saw here was people chose to share information with an app developer. That worked according to how the system was designed. That information was then transferred out of our system to servers that this developer, Alexander Kogan, had, and then that person chose to then go sell the data to Cambridge Analytica. That is going to require much more active intervention and auditing from us to prevent going forward, because once it's out of our system, it is a lot harder for us to have a full understanding of what's happening.
From what you've said today and from previous statements made by you and other officials at your company, data is at the center of your business model. It's how you make money. Your ability to run your business effectively, given that you don't charge your users, is based on monetizing data. And so the real issue, it seems to me, really comes down to what you tell the public, what you tell users of Facebook about what you're going to do with the data, about how you're going to use it. Can you give me a couple of examples, maybe 2 examples of ways in which data is collected by Facebook in a way that people are not aware of? 2 examples of types of data that Facebook collects that might be surprising to Facebook users.
Well, Senator, I would hope that what we do with data is not surprising to people.
And has it been at times?
Well, Senator, I think in this case, people certainly didn't expect this developer to sell the data to Cambridge Analytica. In general, there are 2 types of data that Facebook has. The vast majority, and then the first category, is content that people chose to share on the service themselves. So that's all the photos that you share, the posts that you make, what you think of as the Facebook service, right? Everyone has control every single time that they go to share that. They can delete that data anytime they want. Full control, the majority of the data. The second category is around specific data that we collect in order to make the advertising experiences better and more relevant and work for businesses. And those often revolve around measuring, okay, if we showed you an ad and then you click through and you go somewhere else, we can measure that you actually, that the ad worked. That helps make the experience more relevant and better for people who are getting more relevant ads, and better for the businesses because they perform better. You also have control completely of that second type of data. You can turn off the ability for Facebook to collect that. Your ads will get worse, so a lot of people don't want to do that, but you have complete control over what you do there as well.
Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on the questions around the terms of service. Your terms of service are about 3,200 words with 30 links. One of the links is to your data policy, which is about 2,700 words with 22 links. And I think the point has been well made that people really have no earthly idea what they're signing up for. And I understand that at the present time that's legally binding, but I'm wondering if you can explain to the billions of users in plain language, what are they signing up for?
Senator, that's a good and important question here. In general, you sign up for the Facebook, you get the ability to share the information that you want with people. That's what the service is, right? Is that you can connect with the people that you want, and you can share whatever content matters to you, whether that's photos or links or posts, and you get control over who you share it with, and you can take it down if you want, and you don't need to put anything up in the first place if you don't want.
What about the part that people are worried about, not the fun part?
Well, what's that?
The part that people are worried about is that the data is going to be improperly used. So people are trying to figure out, are your DMs informing the ads? Are your browsing habits being collected? Everybody kind of understands that when you click like on something, or if you say you like a certain movie or have a particular political proclivity, that I think that's fair game. Everybody understands that. What we don't understand exactly, because both as a matter of practice and as a matter of not being able to decipher those terms of service and the privacy policy, is what exactly are you doing with the data, and do you draw a distinction between data collected in the process of utilizing the platform and that which we clearly volunteer to the public to present ourselves to other Facebook users?
Senator, I'm not sure I fully understand this. In general, people come to Facebook to share content with other people. We use that in order to also inform how we rank services like newsfeed and ads to provide more relevant experiences.
Let me try a couple of specific examples. If I'm emailing within WhatsApp, does that ever inform your advertisers?
No, we don't see any of the content in WhatsApp. It's fully encrypted.
Right, but is there some algorithm that spits out some information to your ad platform, and then let's say I'm emailing about Black Panther within WhatsApp? Do I get a Black Panther banner ad?
Senator, Facebook systems do not see the content of messages being transferred over WhatsApp.
Yeah, I know, but that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking about whether these systems talk to each other without a human being touching it.
Senator, I think the answer to your specific question is if you message someone about Black Panther in WhatsApp, it would not inform any ads.
Okay. I want to follow up on Senator Nelson's original question, which is the question of ownership of the data. And I understand as a sort of matter of principle, you're saying, we want our customers to have more rather than less control over the data. But I can't imagine that it's true as a legal matter that I actually own my Facebook data because you're the one monetizing it. Do you want to modify that to sort of express that as a statement of principle, a sort of aspirational goal? But it doesn't seem to me that we own our own data, otherwise we'd be getting a cut.
Well, Senator, you own it in the sense that you choose to put it there, you could take it down any time, and you completely control the terms under which it's used. When you put it on Facebook, you are granting us a license to be able to show it to other people. I mean, that's necessary in order for the service to operate.
Right, but so your definition of ownership is I sign up, I voluntarily, and I may delete my account if I wish, but that's basically it.
Well, Senator, I think that the control is much more granular than that. You can choose each photo that you want to put up or each message, and you can delete those. And you don't need to delete your whole account. You have specific control. You can share different posts with different people.
In the time I have left, I want to propose something to you and take it for the record. I read an interesting article this week by Professor Jack Balkin at Yale that proposes a concept of an information fiduciary. People think of fiduciaries as responsible primarily in the economic sense, but this is really about a trust relationship, like doctors and lawyers. Tech companies should hold in trust our personal data. Are you open to the idea of a information fiduciary enshrined in statute?
Senator, I think it's certainly an interesting idea, and Jack is very thoughtful in this space, so I do think it deserves consideration.
Thank you.
Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here today. I appreciate your testimony. The full scope of a Facebook user's activity can print a very personal picture, I think. And additionally, you have those 2 billion users that are out there every month, and so we all know that's larger than the population of most countries. So how many data categories do you store, does Facebook store on the categories that you collect?
Senator, can you clarify what you mean by data categories?
There's some past reports that have been out there that indicate that Facebook collects about 96 data categories for those 2 billion active users. That's 192 billion data points that are being generated, I think, at any time from consumers globally. So how many does Facebook store out of that? Do you store any?
Senator, I'm not actually sure what that is referring to.
On the points that you collect information, if we call those categories, how many do you store of information that you are collecting?
Senator, the way I think about this is there are 2 broad categories. This probably doesn't line up with whatever the specific report that you were seeing is, and I can make sure that we follow up with you afterwards to get you the information you need on that. The 2 broad categories that I think about are content that a person has chosen to share and that they have complete control over. They get to control when they put it into the service, when they take it down, who sees it. And then the other category are data that are connected to making the ads relevant. You have complete control over both. You can turn off the data related to ads. You can choose not to share any content or control exactly who sees it or take down the content in the former category.
And does Facebook store any of that?
Yes.
How much do you store of that? All of it? All of it? Everything we click on? Is that in storage somewhere?
Senator, we store data about what people share on the service and information that's required to do ranking better, to show you what you care about in news feed.
Do you store text history, user content, activity, device location?
Senator, some of that content, with people's permission, we do store.
Do you disclose any of that?
Yes, Senator, in order for people to share that information with Facebook, I believe that almost everything that you just said would be opt-in.
Right. And the privacy settings, it's my understanding that they limit the sharing of that data with other Facebook users. Is that correct?
Senator, yes.
Okay.
Every person gets to control who gets to see their content.
And does that also limit the ability for Facebook to collect and use it?
Senator, yes, there are controls that determine what Facebook can do as well. So, for example, people have a control about face recognition. If people don't want us to be able to help identify when they're in photos that their friends upload, then they can turn that off.
Right.
And then we won't store that kind of template for them.
And there was some action taken by the FTC in 2011. And you wrote a Facebook post at the time on a public page on the internet that it used to seem scary to people, but as long as they could make their page private, they felt safe sharing with their friends online. Control was key. And you just mentioned control. Senator Hatch asked you a question and you responded there about complete control. So you and your company have used that term repeatedly, and I believe you use it to reassure users. Is that correct? That you do have control and complete control over this information?
Well, Senator, this is how the service works. The core thing that Facebook is, and all of our services, WhatsApp,
Right.
Instagram, Messenger.
So is this then a question of Facebook is about feeling safe, or are users actually safe? Is Facebook being safe?
Senator, I think Facebook is safe. I use it, and my family use it, and all the people I love and care about use it all the time. These controls are not just to make people feel safe, it's actually what people want in the product. The reality is that when just think about how you use this yourself. You don't want to share, you take a photo, you're not going to always send that to the same people. Sometimes you're going to want to text it to one person. Sometimes you might send it to a group. I bet you have a page. You'll probably want to put some stuff out there publicly so you can communicate with your constituents. There are all these different groups of people that someone might want to connect with, and those controls are very important in practice for the operation of the service, not just to build trust, although I think that providing people with control also does that, but actually in order to make it so that people can fulfill their goals with the service.
Senator Combs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for joining us today. I think the whole reason we're having this hearing is because of a tension between two basic principles you've laid out. First, you've said about the data that users post on Facebook, you control and own the data that you put on Facebook. You've said some very positive, optimistic things about privacy and data ownership. But it's also the reality that Facebook is a for-profit entity that generated $40 billion in ad revenue last year by targeting ads. In fact, Facebook claims that advertising makes it easy to find the right people, capture their attention, and get results, and you recognize that an ad-supported service is, as you said earlier today, best aligned with your mission and values. But the reality is there's a lot of examples where ad targeting has led to results that I think we would all disagree with or dislike or would concern us. You've already admitted that Facebook's own ad tools allowed Russians to target users, voters,
based on racist or anti-Muslim or anti-immigrant views, and that may have played a significant role in an election here in the United States. Just today, Time magazine posted a story saying that wildlife traffickers are continuing to use Facebook tools to advertise illegal sales of protected animal parts. And I am left questioning whether your ad targeting tools would allow other concerning practices like diet pill manufacturers targeting teenagers who are struggling with their weight, or allowing a liquor distributor to target alcoholics, or a gambling organization to target those with gambling problems. I'll give you one concrete example I'm sure you're familiar with. ProPublica back in 2016 highlighted that Facebook lets advertisers exclude users by race in real estate advertising. There was a way that you could say that this particular ad, I only want to be seen by white folks, not by people of color, and that clearly violates fair housing laws and our basic sense of fairness in the United States. And you promptly announced that that was a bad idea, you were going to change the tools, and that you would build a new system to spot and reject discriminatory ads that violate our commitment to fair housing. And yet a year later, a follow-up story by ProPublica said that those changes hadn't fully been made, and it was still possible to target housing advertisement in a way that was racially discriminatory. And my concern is that this practice of making bold and engaging promises about changes in practices, and then the reality of how Facebook has operated in the real world, are in persistent tension. Several different senators have asked earlier today about the 2011 FTC consent decree that required Facebook to better protect users' privacy. And there are a whole series of examples where there have been things brought to your attention where Facebook has apologized and has said we're going to change our practices and our policies, and yet there doesn't seem to have been as much follow-up as would be called for. At the end of the day, policies aren't worth the paper they're written on if Facebook doesn't enforce them. And I'll close with a question that's really rooted in an experience I had today as an avid Facebook user. I woke up this morning and was notified by a whole group of friends across the country asking if I had a new family or if there was a fake Facebook post of Chris Coons. I went to the one they suggested. It had a different middle initial than mine. And there's my picture with Senator Dan Sullivan's family. Same schools I went to, but a whole lot of Russian friends. Dan Sullivan's got a very attractive family, by the way. And
keep that for the record there, Mr. Chairman.
The friends who brought this to my attention included people I went to law school with in Hawaii and our own Attorney General in the state of Delaware. And fortunately, I've got great folks who work in my office. I brought it to their attention. They pushed Facebook, and it was taken down by midday. But I'm left worried about what happens to Delawareans who don't have these resources. It's still possible to find Russian trolls operating on the platform. Hate groups thrive in some areas of Facebook, even though your policies prohibit hate speech and you've taken strong steps against extremism and terrorists. But is a Delawarean who's not in the Senate going to get the same sort of quick response? I've already gotten input from other friends who say they've had trouble getting a positive response when they've brought to Facebook's attention a page that's, frankly, clearly violative of your basic principles. My core question is, isn't it Facebook's job to better protect its users? And why do you shift the burden to users to flag inappropriate content and make sure it's taken down?
Senator, there are a number of important points in there, and I think it's clear that this is an area, content policy enforcement, that we need to do a lot better on over time. Mm-hmm. The history of how we got here is we started off in my dorm room with not a lot of resources and not having the AI technology to be able to proactively identify a lot of this stuff. So just because of the sheer volume of content, the main way that this works today is that people report things to us, and then we have our team review that. And as I said before, by the end of this year, we're going to have more than 20,000 people at the company working on security and content review because this is important. Over time, we're going to shift increasingly to a method where more of this content is flagged upfront by AI tools that we develop. We've prioritized the most important types of content that we can build AI tools for today, like terror-related content, where I mentioned earlier that our systems that we deploy, I think we're taking down 99% of the ISIS and Al-Qaeda related content that we take down before a person even flags them to us. If we fast forward 5 or 10 years, I think we're going to have more AI technology that can do that in more areas. And I think we need to get there as soon as possible, which is why we're investing in that.
I
Senator
couldn't agree
Sass.
more. I just think we can't wait 5 years to
Senator-
get housing discrimination and personally offensive material out of Facebook. Thank you,
I agree.
Chairman.
Senator Sass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, thanks for being here. At current pace, you're due to be done with first round of questioning by about 1 a.m., so congratulations. I like Chris Coons a lot, with his own family or with Dan Sullivan's family. Both are great photos. But I want to ask a similar set of questions from the other side, maybe. I think the conceptual line between mere tech company, mere tools, and an actual content company, I think it's really hard. I think you guys have a hard challenge. I think regulation over time will have a hard challenge. And you're a private company, so you can make policies that may be less than First Amendment full spirit embracing, in my view. But I worry about that. I worry about a world where when you go from violent groups to hate speech in a hurry, in one of your responses to one of the opening questions, you may decide, or Facebook may decide, it needs to police a whole bunch of speech that I think America might be better off not having policed by one company that has a really big and powerful platform. Can you define hate speech?
Senator, I think that this is a really hard question, and I think it's one of the reasons why we struggle with it. There are certain definitions that we have around calling for violence or
let's just agree on that. If somebody's calling for violence, that shouldn't be there. I'm worried about the psychological categories around speech. You used language of safety and protection earlier. We see this happening on college campuses all across the country. It's dangerous. 40% of Americans under age 35 tell pollsters they think the First Amendment is dangerous because you might use your freedom to say something that hurts somebody else's feelings. Guess what? There are some really passionately held views about the abortion issue on this panel today. Can you imagine a world where you might decide that pro-lifers are prohibited from speaking about their abortion views on your content, on your platform?
I certainly would not want that to be the case.
But it might really be unsettling to people who've had an abortion to have an open debate about that, wouldn't it?
It might be, but I don't think that would fit any of the definitions of what we have. But I do generally agree with the point that you're making, which is as we're able to technologically shift towards, especially having AI proactively look at content, I think that that's going to create massive questions for society about what obligations we want to require companies to fulfill. And I do think that that's a question that we need to struggle with as a country, because I know other countries are, and they're putting laws in place. And I think that America needs to figure out and create the set of principles that we want American companies to operate under.
Thanks. I wouldn't want you to leave here today and think there's sort of a unified view in the Congress that you should be moving toward policing more and more and more speech. I think violence has no place on your platform. Sex traffickers and human traffickers have no place on your platform. But vigorous debates, adults need to engage in vigorous debates. I have only a little less than 2 minutes left, so I want to shift gears a little bit. But that was about adults. You're a dad. I'd like to talk a little bit about social media addiction. You started your comments today by talking about how Facebook is and was founded as an optimistic company. You and I have had conversations separate from here. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think as you've aged, you might be a little bit less idealistic and optimistic than you were when you started Facebook. As a dad, do you worry about social media addiction as a problem for America's teens?
Well, my hope is that we can be idealistic but have a broad view of our responsibility. To your point about teens, this is certainly something that I think any parent thinks about, is how much do you want your kids using technology? At Facebook specifically, I view our responsibility as not just building services that people like, but building services that are good for people and good for society as well. So we study a lot of effects of well-being of our tools and broader technology. And like any tool, there are good and bad uses of it. What we find in general is that if you're using social media in order to build relationships, right? So you're sharing content with friends, you're interacting, then that is associated with all of the long-term measures of well-being that you would intuitively think of. Long-term health, long-term happiness, long-term feeling connected, feeling less lonely. But if you're using the internet and social media primarily to just passively consume content and you're not engaging with other people, then it doesn't have those positive effects and it could be negative.
We're almost at time, so I want to ask you one more. Do social media companies hire consulting firms to help them figure out how to get more dopamine feedback loops so that people don't want to leave the platform?
No, Senator, that's not how we talk about this or how we set up our product teams. We want our products to be valuable to people, and if they're valuable, then people choose to use them.
Are you aware of other social media companies that do hire such consultants?
Not sitting here today.
Thanks.
Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to Senator Blumenthal's pointed questions, you refused to answer whether Facebook should be required by law to obtain clear permission from users before selling or sharing their personal information. So I'm going to ask it one more time. Yes or no? Should Facebook get clear permission from users before selling or sharing sensitive information about your health, your finances, your relationships? Should you have to get their permission? That's essentially the consent decree with the Federal Trade Commission that you signed in 2011. Should you have to get permission? Should the consumer have to opt in?
Senator, we do require permission to use the system and to put information in there and for all the uses of it. I want to be clear, we don't sell information. So regardless of whether we could get permission to do that, that's just not a thing that we're going to go do.
So would you support legislation? I have a bill, Senator Blumenthal referred to it, the Consent Act, that would just put on the books a law that said that Facebook and any other company that gathers information about Americans has to get their permission, their affirmative permission, before it can be reused for other purposes. Would you support that legislation to make it a national standard for not just Facebook, but for all the other companies out there, some of them bad actors? Would you support that legislation?
Senator, in general, I think that principle is exactly right, and I think we should have a discussion around how to best codify
would you
that.
support legislation to back that general principle, that opt-in, that getting permission is the standard? Would you support legislation to make that the American standard? Europeans have passed that as a law. Facebook's going to live with that law beginning on May 25th. Would you support that as the law in the United States?
Senator, as a principle, yes, I would. I think the details matter a lot.
Right,
and
but
now that,
assuming that we work out the details, you do support opt-in as the standard, getting permission affirmatively as the standard for the United States. Is that correct?
Senator, I think that's the right principle. And 100 billion times a day in our services, when people go to share content, they choose who they want to share it affirmatively.
You could support a law that enshrines that as the promise that we make to the American people, that permission has to be obtained before their information is used. Is that correct?
Senator, yes. I've
Okay.
said that in principle, I think that makes sense,
Okay.
and the details matter, and I look forward to having our team work with you on fleshing that out.
Right. So the next subject, because I want to, again, I want to make sure that we kind of drill down here. You earlier made reference to the Child Online Privacy Protection Act of 1999, which I am the author of. So that is the Constitution for child privacy protection online in the country, and I'm very proud of that. But there are no protections additionally for a 13, a 14, or a 15-year-old. They get the same protections that a 30-year-old or a 50-year-old get. So I have a separate piece of legislation to ensure that kids who are under 16 absolutely have a privacy bill of rights, and that permission has to be received from their parents or the children before any of their information is reused for any other purpose other than that which was originally intended. Would you support a child online privacy bill of rights for kids under 16 to guarantee that that information is not reused for any other purpose without explicit permission from the parents or the kids?
Senator, I think as a general principle, I think protecting minors and protecting their privacy is extremely important. And we do a number of things on Facebook to do that already, which I'm happy to get into.
And I appreciate it. I'm talking about a law. I'm talking about a law. Would you support a law to ensure that kids under 16 have this privacy bill of rights? I had this conversation with you in your office 7 years ago about this specific subject in Palo Alto. And I think that's really what the American people want to know right now. What is the protections of this? What are the protections that are going to be put on the books for their families, but especially for their children? Would you support a privacy bill of rights for kids where opt-in is the standard? Yes or no?
Senator, I think that's an important principle. And
I appreciate that.
And I think we should.
Do we need a law to protect those children? That's my question to you. Do you believe we need a law to do so? Yes or no?
Senator, I'm not sure if we need a law, but I think that this is certainly a thing that deserves a lot of discussion.
I couldn't disagree with you more. We're leaving these children to the most rapacious commercial predators in the country who will exploit these children unless we absolutely have a law on the books.
Please,
and I
Senator,
think it is absolutely
please give a short answer.
Senator, I look forward to having my team follow up to flesh out the details of it.
I don't think this is a
Senator
difficult
Flake. Senator Flake.
issue to get a correct answer to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Thanks for enduring so far. And I'm sorry if I plow old ground. I had to be away for a bit. Myself and Senator Coons, Senator Peters, and a few others were in the country of Zimbabwe just a few days ago. We met with opposition figures who had talked about, their goal is to be able to have access to state-run media in many African countries, many countries around the world, third world countries, small countries. The only traditional media is state-run. And we asked them how they get their message out, and it's through social media. Facebook provides a very valuable service in many countries for opposition leaders or others who simply don't have access, unless maybe just before an election, to traditional media. So that's very valuable, and I think we all recognize that. On the flip side, we've seen with the Rohingya, that example of where the state can use similar data or use this platform to go after people. You talked about what you're doing in that regard, hiring more traditional or local language speakers. What else are you doing in that regard to ensure that these states don't, or these governments go after opposition figures or others?
Senator, there are three main things that we're doing in Myanmar specifically, and that will apply to other situations like that. The first is hiring enough people to do local language support, because the definition of hate speech or things that can be racially coded to incite violence are very language specific, and we can't do that with just English speakers for people around the world, so we need to grow that. The second is, in these countries there tend to be active civil society who can help us identify the figures who are spreading hate, and we can work with them in order to make sure that those figures don't have a place on our platform. The third is that there are specific product changes that we can make in order to that might be necessary in some countries but not others, including things around news literacy, right? And encouraging people in different countries about ramping up or down things that we might do around fact-checking of content, specific product-type things that we would want to implement in different places. But I think that's something that we're going to have to do in a number of countries.
There are obviously limits, native speakers that you can hire or people that have eyes on the page. Artificial intelligence is going to have to take the bulk of this. How much are you investing and working on that tool to do what really we don't have or can't hire enough people to do?
Senator, I think you're absolutely right that over the long term, building AI tools is going to be the scalable way to identify and root out most of this harmful content. Mm-hmm. We're investing a lot in doing that, as well as scaling up the number of people who are doing content review. one of the things I've mentioned is in this year, or in the last year, we've basically doubled the number of people doing security and content review. We're going to have more than 20,000 people working on security and content review by the end of this year. So it's going to be continuing to grow the people who are doing review in these places with building AI tools, which we're working as quickly as we can on that, but some of this stuff is just hard. That I think is going to help us get to a better place on eliminating more of this harmful content.
Thank you. You've talked some about this, I know. Do you believe that Russian and or Chinese governments have harvested Facebook data and have detailed data sets on Facebook users? Has your forensic analysis shown you who else other than Cambridge Analytica downloaded this kind of data?
Senator, we have kicked off an investigation of every app that had access to a large amount of people's data before we locked down the platform in 2014. That's underway. I imagine we'll find some things, and we are committed to telling the people who are affected when we do. I don't think sitting here today that we have specific knowledge of other efforts by those nation states, but in general, we assume that a number of countries are trying to abuse our systems.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Person is Senator Hirano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has proposed a new extreme vetting initiative, which they have renamed Visa Life Cycle Vetting. That sounds less scary. They have already held an industry day that they advertised on the federal contracting website to get input from tech companies on the best way to, among other things, and I'm quoting ICE, exploit publicly available information such as media, blogs, public hearings, conferences, academic websites, social media websites such as Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn to extract pertinent information regarding targets. And basically what they want to do with these targets is to determine, and again I'm quoting the ICE's own document, they want, ICE has been directed to develop processes that determine and evaluate an applicant's, i.e. target's probability of becoming a positively contributing member of society, as well as their ability to contribute to national interests in order to meet the executive order, that is the president's executive order. And then ICE must also develop a mechanism or methodology that allows them to assess whether an applicant intends to commit criminal or terrorist acts after entering the United States. The question to you is, does Facebook plan to cooperate with this extreme vetting initiative and help the Trump administration target people for deportation or other ICE enforcement?
Senator, I don't know that we've had specific conversations around that. In general,
well, if you were asked to provide or cooperate with ICE so that they could determine whether somebody's going to commit a crime, for example, or become fruitful members of our society, would you cooperate?
We would not proactively do that. We cooperate with law enforcement in two cases. One is if we become aware of an imminent threat of harm, then we will proactively reach out to law enforcement, as we believe is our responsibility to do. The other is when law enforcement reaches out to us with a valid legal subpoena or request for data. In those cases, if their request is overly broad or we believe it's not a legal request, then we're going to push back aggressively.
Well, let's assume that ICE doesn't have a law, there's no law or rule that requires that Facebook cooperate to allow them to get this kind of information so that they can make those kinds of assessments. It sounds to me as though you would decline.
Senator, that is correct.
Is there some way that, well, I know that you determine what kind of content would be deemed harmful. So do you believe that ICE can even do what they are talking about, namely through a combination of various kinds of information, including information that they would hope to obtain from entities such as yours, predict who will commit crimes or present a national security problem? Do you think that that's even doable?
Senator, I'm not familiar enough with what they're doing to offer an informed opinion on that.
Well, you have to make assessments as to what constitutes hate speech. That's pretty hard to do. You have to assess what election interference is. So these are rather difficult to identify, but wouldn't trying to predict whether somebody's going to commit a crime fit into the category of a pretty difficult to assess?
Senator, it sounds difficult to me. All of these things, like you're saying, are difficult.
Well,
I don't know, without having worked on it or thinking about it, how
I
much
think common
progress
sense
one
would
could
tell
make.
us that that's pretty difficult, and yet that's what ICE is proceeding to do. You were asked about discriminatory advertising, and in February of 2017, Facebook announced that it would no longer allow certain kinds of ads that discriminated on the basis of race, gender, family status, sexual orientation, disability, or veteran status, all categories prohibited by federal law and housing. And yet, after 2017, it was discovered that you could, in fact, place those kinds of ads. So what is the status of whether or not these ads can currently be placed on Facebook? And have you followed through on your February 2017 promise to address this problem? And is there a way for the public to verify that you have, or are we just expected to trust that you've done this?
Senator, those are all important questions. And in general, it is against our policies to have any ads that are discriminatory.
Well, you said that you wouldn't allow it, but then, what is it, ProPublica could place these ads even after you said you would no longer allow these kinds of ads. So what assurance do we have from you that this is going to stop?
Well, two things. One is that we've removed the ability to exclude ethnic groups and other sensitive categories from ad targeting. So that just isn't a feature that's even available anymore. For some of these cases where it may make sense to target proactively a group, the enforcement today is still, we review ads, we screen them up front, but most of the enforcement today is still that our community flags issues for us when they come up. So if the community flags that issue for us, then our team, which has thousands of people working on it, should take it down. We'll make some mistakes, but we try to make as few as possible. Over time, I think the strategy would be to develop more AI tools that can more proactively identify those types of content and do that filtering up front.
So it's a work in progress.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Senator Sullivan's up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Zuckerberg, quite a story, right? Dorm room to the global behemoth that you guys are, only in America. Would you agree with that?
Senator, mostly in America.
You couldn't do this in China, right? Or what you did in 10 years.
Well, Senator, there are some very strong Chinese internet companies.
Right, but you're supposed to answer yes to this question. Okay, come on, I'm trying to help you, right? I mean, give me a break. You're in front of a bunch of... The answer is yes, okay? So thank you. Now, your testimony, you have talked about a lot of power. You've been involved in elections. I thought your testimony was very interesting, really all over the world. The Facebook, 2 billion users, over 200 million Americans, 40 billion in revenue. I believe you and Google have almost 75% of the digital advertising in the U.S. One of the key issues here is Facebook too powerful? Are you too powerful? And do you think you're too powerful?
Well, Senator, I think most of the time when people talk about our scale, they're referencing that we have 2 billion people in our community. And I think one of the big questions that we need to think through here is the vast majority of those 2 billion people are outside of the U.S. And I think that that's something that, to your point, that Americans should be proud of. Okay, and when I brought up the Chinese internet companies, I think that that's a real strategic and competitive threat that in American technology policy we should be thinking about.
Let me get to another point here real quick. I don't want to interrupt, but you know, when you look at kind of the history of this country and you look at the history of these kind of hearings, right? You're a smart guy, you read a lot of history. When companies become big and powerful and accumulate a lot of wealth and power, what typically happens from this body is there's a instinct to either regulate or break up, right? Look at the history of this nation. You have any thoughts on those two policy approaches?
Well, Senator, I'm not the type of person who thinks that all regulation is bad. So I think the internet is becoming increasingly important in people's lives, and I think we need to have a full conversation about what is the right regulation, not whether it should be or shouldn't be.
Let me talk about the tension there, because I think it's a good point, and I appreciate you mentioning that. You know, one of my worries on regulation, again, with a company of your size, you're saying, hey, we might be interested in being regulated, but as you know, regulations can also cement the dominant power. So what do I mean by that? You know, you have a lot of lobbyists. I think every lobbyist in town is involved in this hearing in some way or another, a lot of powerful interests. You look at what happened with Dodd-Frank. That was supposed to be aimed at the big banks. The regulations ended up empowering the big banks and keeping the small banks down. Do you think that that's a risk, given your influence, that if we regulate, we're actually going to regulate into you into a position of cemented authority, when one of my biggest concerns about what you guys are doing is that the next Facebook, which we all want, the guy in the dorm room, we all want that to start it, that you are becoming so dominant that we're not able to have that next Facebook. What are your views on that?
Well, Senator, I agree with the point that when you're thinking through regulation, across all industries, you need to be careful that it doesn't cement in the current companies that are winning.
But would you try to do that? Isn't that the normal inclination of a company to say, hey, I'm going to hire the best guys in town and I'm going to cement in an advantage? You wouldn't do that if we were regulating you?
Senator, that certainly wouldn't be our approach. But I think part of the challenge with regulation in general is that when you add more rules that companies need to follow, that's something that a larger company like ours inherently just has the resources to go do, correct, and that might just be harder for a smaller company getting started to be able to comply with.
Correct.
So it's not something that, going into this, I would look at the conversation as what is the right outcome. I think there are real challenges that we face around content and privacy and in a number of other areas, ads transparency, elections.
Let me get, I'm sorry to interrupt, but let me get to one final question that kind of relates to what you're talking about in terms of content, regulation, and what exactly Facebook is. You know, you mentioned you're a tech company, a platform, but there's some who are saying that you're the world's biggest publisher. I think about 140 million Americans get their news from Facebook, and when you mentioned to Senator Cornyn, you said you are responsible for your content. So which are you? Are you a tech company, or are you the world's largest publisher? Because I think that goes to a really important question on what form of regulation or government action, if any, we would take.
Senator, this is a really big question. I view us as a tech company because the primary thing that we do is build technology and products.
But you said you're responsible for your content, which makes
exactly
you kind of a publisher, right?
Well, I agree that we're responsible for the content, but we don't produce the content. I think that when people ask us if we're a media company or a publisher, my understanding of what the heart of what they're really getting at is, do we feel a responsibility for the content on our platform? The answer to that, I think, is clearly yes. But I don't think that that's incompatible with fundamentally at our core being a technology company where the main thing that we do is have engineers and build products.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Udall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here today. You spoke very idealistically about your company, and you talked about the strong values, and you said you wanted to be a positive force in the community and the world. And you were hijacked by Cambridge Analytica for political purposes. Are you angry about that?
Absolutely.
And you're determined, and I assume you want changes made in the law. That's what you've talked about today.
Senator, the most important thing that I care about right now is making sure that no one interferes in the various 2018 elections around the world. We have an extremely important U.S. midterm. We have major elections in India, Brazil, Mexico, Pakistan, Hungary coming up. And we're going to take a number of measures, from building and deploying new AI tools that take down fake news, to growing our security team to more than 20,000 people, to making it so that we verify every advertiser who's doing political and issue ads, to make sure that that kind of interference that the Russians were able to do in 2016 is going to be much harder for anyone to pull off in the future.
And I think you've said earlier that you support the Honest Ads Act, and so I assume that means you want changes in the law in order to effectuate exactly what you talked about.
Senator, yes, we support the Honest Ads Act.
And so
we're implementing it.
Are you going to come back up here and be a strong advocate to see that law is passed?
Senator, the biggest thing that I think we can do is implement it.
Well, that's a kind
and
of
we're doing that.
Yes or no question there. I hate to interrupt you, but are you going to come back and be a strong advocate? You're angry about this? You think there ought to be change? There ought to be a law put in place? Are you going to come back and be an advocate to get a law in place like that?
Senator, our team is certainly going to work on this. What I can say is the biggest
I'm
thing
talking about you, not your team.
Well, Senator, I try not to come
back here
to
and be an
DC.
advocate for that law. That's what I want to see. I mean, you're upset about this. We're upset about this. I'd like a yes or no answer on that one.
Senator, I'm posting and speaking out publicly about how important this is. I don't come to Washington, D.C. too often. I'm going to direct my team to focus on this. And the biggest thing that I feel like we can do is implement it, which we're doing.
Well, the biggest thing you can do is to be a strong advocate yourself, personally, here in Washington. Just let me make that clear. But many of us have seen the kinds of images shown earlier by Senator Leahy. You saw those images that he held up. Can you guarantee that any of those images that can be attributed or associated with the Russian company Internet Research Agency have been purged from your platform?
Senator, no, I can't guarantee that, because this is an ongoing arms race. As long as there are people sitting in Russia whose job it is to try to interfere with elections around the world, this is going to be an ongoing conflict. What I can commit is that we're going to invest significantly, because this is a top priority, to make sure that people aren't spreading misinformation or trying to interfere in elections on Facebook. But I don't think it would be a realistic expectation to assume that as long as there are people who are employed in Russia for whom this is their job, that we're going to have zero amount of that, or that we're going to be 100% successful at preventing that.
Now, beyond disclosure of online ads, what specific steps are you taking to ensure that foreign money is not financing political or issue ads on Facebook in violation of U.S. law? Just because someone submits a disclosure that says paid for by some 501c3 or PAC, if that group has no real person in the U.S., how can we ensure it is not foreign interference?
Senator, our verification program involves two pieces. One is verifying the identity of the person who's buying the ads, that they have a valid government identity. The second is verifying their location. So if you're sitting in Russia, for example, and you say that you're in the U.S., then we'll be able to make it a lot harder to do that, because what we're actually going to do is mail a code to the address that you say you're at. And if you can't get access to that code, then you're not going to be able to run ads.
Yeah. Now, Facebook is creating an independent group to study the abuse of social media in elections. You've talked about that. Will you commit that all findings of this group are made public, no matter what they say about Facebook or its business model? Yes or no answer?
Senator, that's the purpose of this group, is that Facebook does not get to control what these folks publish. These are going to be independent academics, and Facebook has no prior publishing control. They'll be able to do the studies that they're doing and publish the results.
And you're fine with them being public? And what's the timing on getting those out?
Senator, we're kicking off the research now. Our goal is to focus on both providing ideas for preventing interference in 2018 and beyond, and also for holding us accountable to making sure that the measures that we put in place are successful in doing that. So I would hope that we will start to see the first results later this year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Udall. Senator Moran is up next, and I would just say again, for the benefit of those who are here, that after a couple of more questioners, we'll probably give the witness another short break.
Thank you.
We're getting about almost 2/3 through the list of members who are here to ask questions. Senator Moran.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for your, I'm over here. Thank you for your testimony and thank you for your presence here today. On March the 26th of this year, the FTC confirmed that it was investigating Facebook to determine whether its privacy practices violated the FTC Act or the consent order that Facebook entered into with the agency in 2011. I chair the Commerce Committee subcommittee that has jurisdiction over the Federal Trade Commission. I remain interested in Facebook's assertion that it rejects any suggestion of violating that consent order. Part 2 of that consent order requires that Facebook, quote, clearly and prominently display notice and obtain users' affirmative consent before sharing their information with, quote, any third party. My question is, how does the case of approximately 87 million Facebook friends having their data shared with a third party due to the consent of only 300,000 consenting users not violate that agreement?
Well, Senator, like I said earlier, I mean, our view is that we believe that we are in compliance with the consent order, but I think that we have a broader responsibility to protect people's privacy even beyond that. And in this specific case, the way that the platform worked, or that you could sign into an app and bring some of your information and some of your friends' information, is how we explained it would work. People had settings to that effect. We explained and they consented to it working that way. And the system basically worked as it was designed. The issue is that we designed the system in a way that wasn't good. And now we, starting in 2014, have changed the design of the system so that way it just massively restricts the amount of data access that a developer could get. Going forward,
I'm sorry, the 300,000 people, they were treated in a way that was appropriate. They consented, but you're not suggesting that the friends consented.
Senator, I believe that we rolled out this developer platform and that we explained to people how it worked and that they did consent to it. It makes sense, I think, to go through the way the platform works. I mean, it's in 2007, we announced the Facebook developer platform, and the idea was that you wanted to make more experiences social, right? So, for example, if you might want to have a calendar that can have your friends' birthdays on it, or you might want your address book to have your friends' pictures in it, or you might want a map that can show your friends' addresses on it. In order to do that, we needed to build a tool that allowed people to sign into an app and bring some of their information and some of their friends' information to those apps. We made it very clear that this is how it worked, and when people signed up for Facebook, they signed up for that as well. Now, a lot of good use cases came from that. I mean, there were games that were built, there were integrations with companies that I think we're familiar with, like Netflix and Spotify. But over time, what became clear was that that also enabled some abuse. And that's why in 2014, we took the step of changing the platform. So now when people sign into an app, you do not bring some of your friends' information with you. You're only bringing your own information, and you're able to connect with friends who have also authorized that app directly.
Let me turn to your bug bounty program. Our subcommittee has had a hearing in regard to bug bounty. Your press release indicated that was one of the 6 changes that Facebook initially offered to crack down on platform abuses was to reward outside parties who find vulnerabilities. One concern I have regarding the utility of this approach is that the vulnerability disclosure programs are normally geared toward identifying unauthorized access to data, not pointing out data sharing arrangement that likely could harm someone, but technically abide by complex consent agreements. How do you see the bug bounty program that you've announced addressing the issue of that?
Sorry, could you clarify what specifically?
How do you see that the bug bounty program that you are and have announced will deal with the sharing of information not permissible as compared to just unauthorized access to data?
Senator, I'm not actually sure I understand this enough to speak to that specific point, and I can have my team follow up with you on the details of that. In general, bounty programs are an important part of the security arsenal for hardening a lot of systems. I think we should expect that we're going to invest a lot in hardening our systems ourselves, and that we're going to audit and investigate a lot of the folks in our ecosystem. But even with that, having the ability to enlist other third parties outside of the company to be able to help us out by giving them an incentive to point out when they see issues, I think is likely going to help us improve the security of the platform overall, which is why we did this.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Next up, Senator Booker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, Mr. Zuckerberg. As you know, much of my life has been focused on low-income communities, poor communities, working-class communities, and trying to make sure they have a fair shake. This country has a very bad history of discriminatory practices towards low-income Americans and Americans of color, from the redlining, FHA practices, even to more recently, really discriminatory practices in the mortgage business. I've always seen technology as a promise to democratize our nation, expand access, expand opportunities. But unfortunately, we've also seen how platforms, technology platforms like Facebook, can actually be used to double down on discrimination and give people more sophisticated tools with which to discriminate. Now, in 2016, ProPublica revealed that advertisers could use ethnic affinity, a user's race, to market categories to potentially discriminate overall against Facebook users in the areas of housing, employment, and credit, echoing a dark history in this country, and also in violation of federal law. In 2016, Facebook committed to fixing this, that the advertisers who have access to this data, to fixing it. But unfortunately, a year later, as ProPublica's article showed, they found that the system Facebook built was still allowing housing ads without applying these new restrictions that were put on. Facebook then opted in a system that's very similar to what we've been talking about with Cambridge Analytica, that they could self-certify that they were not engaging in these practices and complying with federal law, using this self-certification way to overcome and to comply with, rather, Facebook's anti-discrimination policy. Unfortunately, in a recent lawsuit, as of February 2018, alleges that discriminatory ads were still being created on Facebook, still disproportionately impacting low-income communities and communities of color. Given the fact that you allowed Cambridge Analytica to self-certify in a way that I think you've expressed regret over, is self-certification the best and strongest way to safeguard against the misuse of your platform and protect the data of users and not let it be manipulated in such a discriminatory fashion?
Senator, this is a very important question. And, in general, I think over time we're going to move towards more proactive review with more AI tools to help flag problematic content. In the near term, we have a lot of content on the platform, and it's hard to review every single thing up front. We do a quick screen. But I agree with you that I think in this specific case, I'm not happy with where we are. And I think it makes sense to really focus on making sure that these areas get more review sooner.
And I know you understand that there is a growing distrust. I know a lot of civil rights organizations have met with you about Facebook's sense of urgency to address these issues. There's a distrust that stems from the fact, and I know I've had conversations with leaders in Facebook about the lack of diversity in the tech sector as well. People who are writing these algorithms, people who are actually policing for this data, policing for these problems. Are they going to be a part of a more diverse group that's looking at this? You're looking to hire, as you said, 5,000 new positions for, among other things, reviewing content. But we know in your industry, the inclusivity, that it's a real serious problem that you are an industry that lacks diversity in a very dramatic fashion. It's not just true with Facebook, it's true with the tech area as well. And so it's very important for me to communicate that larger sense of urgency and what a lot of civil rights organizations are concerned with. And we should be working towards a more collaborative approach. And I'm wondering if you'd be open to opening your platform for civil rights organizations to really audit a lot of these companies dealing in areas of credit and housing, to really audit what is actually happening and better have more transparency in working with your platform.
Senator, I think that's a very good idea, and I think we should follow up on the details of that.
I also want to say that there was an investigation, something that's very disturbing to me, is the fact that there have been law enforcement organizations that use Facebook's platform to surveil African American organizations like Black Lives Matter. I know you've expressed support for the group, and Philandro Castile's killing was broadcast live on Facebook. But there are a lot of communities of color worried that that data could be used to surveil groups like Black Lives Matter, like folks who are trying to organize against substantive issues of discrimination in this country. Is this something that you're committed to addressing and to ensuring that the freedoms that civil rights activists and others are not targeted, or their work not being undermined, or people not using your platform to unfairly surveil and try to undermine the activities that those groups are doing?
Yes, Senator. I think that that's very important. We're committed to that. And in general, unless law enforcement has a very clear subpoena or ability or reason to get access to information, we're going to push back on that across the board.
And then I'd just like, for the record, because my time has expired, but there's a lawsuit against Facebook about discrimination, and you moved for the lawsuit to be dismissed because no harm was shown. Could you please submit to the record, could you believe that people of color who are not recruited for various economic opportunities are being harmed? Can you please clarify why you moved to dismiss that lawsuit for the record?
For the record.
Thank you.
Senator Heller's up next. Go to you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Appreciate the time, and thank you for being here. I'm over here. Thanks. And thank you for taking time. I know it's been a long day, and I think you're at the final stretch here, but I'm glad that you are here. Yesterday, Facebook sent out a notification to 87 million users that information was given to Cambridge Analytica without their consent. My daughter was one of the 87 million, and 6 of my staff, all from Nevada, received this notification. Can you tell me how many Nevadans were among the 87 million that received this notification?
Senator, I don't have this broken out by state right now, but I can have my team follow up with you to get you the information.
Okay. I figured that would be the answer. If after hearing this, going through this hearing, and Nevadans no longer want to have a Facebook account, if that's the case, if a Facebook user deletes their account, do you delete their data?
Yes.
My kids have been on Facebook and Instagram for years. How long do you keep a user's data?
Sorry,
how long do you keep a user's data once they after they've left? If they choose to delete their account, how long do you keep their data?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I know we try to delete it as quickly as is reasonable. We have a lot of complex systems, and it takes a while to work through all that. But I think we try to move as quickly as possible, and I can follow up or have my team follow up to get you the data on that.
Okay. Have you ever said that you won't sell an ad based on personal information, simply that you wouldn't sell this data because of the usage of it goes too far?
Senator, could you clarify that?
Have you ever drawn the line on selling data to an advertiser?
Yes, Senator. We don't sell data at all. So the way the ad system works is advertisers can come to us and say, I have a message that I'm trying to reach a certain type of people. They might be interested in something. They might live in a place. And then we help them get that message in front of people. But this is it's widely mischaracterized about our system that we sell data. And it's actually one of the most important parts of how Facebook works is we do not sell data. Advertisers do not get access to people's individual data.
Have you ever collected the content of phone calls or messages through any Facebook application or service?
Senator, I don't believe we've ever collected the content of phone calls. We have an app called Messenger that allows people to message mostly their Facebook friends. And we do, on the Android operating system, allow people to use that app as their client for both Facebook messages and texts. So we do allow people to import their texts into that.
Okay, let me ask you about government surveillance. For years, Facebook said that there should be strict limits on the information the government can access on Americans. And by the way, I agreed with you that because privacy is important to Nevadans. You argued that Facebook users wouldn't trust you if they thought you were giving their private information to the intelligence community. Yet you use and sell the same data to make money. And in the case of Cambridge Analytica, you don't even know how it's used after you sell it. Can you tell us why this isn't hypocritical?
Well, Senator, once again, we don't sell any data to anyone. We don't sell it to advertisers, and we don't sell it to developers. What we do allow is for people to sign into apps and bring their data, and it used to be the data of some of their friends, but now it isn't, with them. And that, I think, makes sense. I mean, that's basic data portability, the ability that you own the data, you should be able to take it from one app to another if you'd like.
Do you believe you're more responsible with millions of Americans' personal data than the federal government would be?
Yes. But Senator, your point about surveillance, I think that there's a very important distinction to draw here, which is that when organizations do surveillance, people don't have control over that. But on Facebook, everything that you share there, you have control over. You can say, I don't want this information to be there. You have full access to understand every piece of information that Facebook might know about you, and you can get rid of all of it. And I don't know of any other any surveillance organization in the world that operates that way, which is why I think that comparison just isn't really apt here.
With you here today, do you think you're a victim?
No.
Do you think Facebook as a company is a victim?
Senator, no. I think we have a responsibility to protect everyone in our community from anyone in our ecosystem who is going to potentially harm them. And I think that we haven't done enough historically, and we need to step up and do more.
Do you consider the 87 million users, do you consider them victims?
Senator, I think, yes. I mean, they did not want their information to be sold to Cambridge Analytica by a developer. And that happened, and it happened on our watch. So even though we didn't do it, I think we have a responsibility to be able to prevent that and be able to take action sooner. And we're committing to make sure that we do that going forward, which is why the steps that I announced before are now, the two most important things that we're doing are locking down the platform to make sure that developers can't get access to that much data so this can't happen again going forward, which I think is largely the case since 2014. And going backwards, we need to investigate every single app that might have had access to a large amount of people's data to make sure that no one else was misusing it. And if we find that they are, we're going to get into their systems, do a full audit, make sure they delete it, and we're going to tell everyone who's affected.
Mr. Chairman,
thank you, Senator Heller. We'll go to Senator Peters and then into the break, and then Senator Tillis coming out of the break. So, Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, thank you for being here today. You know, you've talked about your very humble beginnings in starting Facebook in your dorm room, which I appreciated that story, but certainly Facebook has changed an awful lot over a relatively short period of time. When Facebook launched its timeline feature, consumers saw their friends post chronologically was the process. But Facebook has since then changed to a timeline driven by some very sophisticated algorithms. And I think it has left many people as a result of that asking, you know, why am I seeing this feed, and why am I seeing this right now? And now, in light of the Cambridge Analytica issue, Facebook users are asking, I think, some new questions right now. Can I believe what I'm seeing? And who has access to this information about me? So I think it's safe to say, very simply, that Facebook is losing the trust of an awful lot of Americans as a result of this incident. And I think an example of this is something that I've been hearing a lot from folks that have been coming up to me and talking about really kind of experience they've had where they're having a conversation with friends, not on the phone, just talking, and then they see ads popping up fairly quickly on their Facebook. So I've heard constituents fear that Facebook is mining audio from their mobile devices for the purpose of ad targeting, which I think speaks to this lack of trust that we're seeing here. But and I understand there's some technical issues and logistical issues for that to happen, but for the record, I think it's clear, seeing I hear it all the time, including from my own staff. Yes or no, does Facebook use audio obtained from mobile devices to enrich personal information about its users?
No.
The
well, Senator, let me be clear on this. I mean, so you're talking about this conspiracy theory that gets passed around that we listen to what's going on your microphone and use that for ads.
Right.
We don't do that. To be clear, we do allow people to take videos on their devices and share those. And of course, videos also have audio. So we do, while you're taking a video, record that and use that to make the service better by making sure that your videos have audio. But I mean, that I think is pretty clear, but I just wanted to make sure I was exhaustive there.
Well, I appreciate that. And hopefully that'll dispel a lot of what I've been hearing. So thank you for saying that. Certainly, today, in the era of mega data, we are finding that data drives everything, including consumer behavior. And so consumer information is probably the most valuable information you can get in the data ecosystem. And certainly, folks, as you've mentioned in your testimony here, people like the fact that they can have targeted ads that they're going to be interested in, as opposed to being bombarded by a lot of ads that they don't have any interest in. And that consumer information is important in order for you to tailor that. But also, people are now beginning to wonder, is there an expense to that when it comes to perhaps exposing them to being manipulated or through deception? You've talked about artificial intelligence. You brought that up many times during your testimony. And I know you've employed some new algorithms to target bots, bring down fake accounts, deal with terrorism, things that you've talked about in this hearing. But you also know that artificial intelligence is not without its risk, and that you have to be very transparent about how those algorithms are constructed. How do you see artificial intelligence, more specifically, dealing with the ecosystem by helping to get consumer insights, but also keeping consumer privacy safe?
Senator, I think the core question you're asking about AI transparency is a really important one that people are just starting to very seriously study, and that's ramping up a lot. And I think this is going to be a very central question for how we think about AI systems over the next decade and beyond. Right now, a lot of our AI systems make decisions in ways that people don't really understand.
Right.
And I don't think that in 10 or 20 years in the future that we all want to build, we want to end up with systems that people don't understand how they're making decisions. So doing the research now to make sure that these systems can have those principles as we're developing them, I think is certainly an extremely important thing.
Well, you bring up the principles because, as you're well aware, AI systems, especially in very complex environments when you have machine learning, it's sometimes very difficult to understand, as you mentioned, exactly how those decisions were arrived at. There's examples of how decisions are made on a discriminatory basis, and that it can compound if you're not very careful about how that occurs. And so is your company, you mentioned principles, is your company developing a set of principles that are going to guide that development? And would you provide details to us as to what those principles are and how they will help deal with this issue?
Yes, Senator. I can make sure that our team follows up and gets you the information on that. And we have a whole AI ethics team that is working on developing basically the technology. It's not just about philosophical principles. It's also a technological foundation for making sure that this goes in the direction that we want.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peters. We'll recess for 5 and come back in. So we'll give Mr. Zuckerberg a quick break here. Thanks.
Peters asked it, right? So just say, hey, he said no. But then, like, everybody has anecdotes, right? And just use one. This is my daughter. just ask, does your size, given Facebook, I kind of asked you